Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another bite-sized branding live show. Hustling this morning at nice and early at 10 a.m. Hopefully, you're all excited for the show we have today. As always, I'd like to welcome Grant to the show. Whoops, he's on this side. There he is. Hey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Tom. I'm known as the head fire starter, and I'm the sidekick to bite-sized branding. And what we do is talk about everything and anything to do with marketing, advertising, and branding, especially in the digital space. But we like to be contentious, we like to be topical, and at the same time, we like to get our point of view across because we have different points of view. But at the end of the day, there's no such thing as wrong answers. It's all about how to think what is right for you. Over to you, Bernard.
Nice. And, on that, we've got a special show today. We're going to focus a little bit more around the whole investment around the brand and marketing space and what's happening in the change of the way that people go to business. Because fortunately enough, we're in a very interesting space right now where things are changing and evolving, and we are coming to the end of financial year. So we thought we'd do some things that are really topical about what's going on right now. But also, if you are intending to join us next week, come along for the show. We're intending to get some special guests, so we're going to have a four-person show. We're going to try that again.
We're going to try that
again. And then we're going to have another special guest on the show after that as well. So we've got a couple of guests all lined up. So definitely come in and join us on the next shows. So let's get into today. Everyone's going to get revved up and rolling. It's a nice sunny Friday in Sydney. That's not true.
It's freezing cold in Melbourne.
Is it? Great. The best of Australian weather. We'll just keep telling the rest of the world that it's always sunny here, though. So, Grant, the first subject we're going to kick off is, I thought about it this morning, and it's something that I wanted to kind of bring to life. The topic is, why rebrand? Why is it that people go through this process of rebranding? What is the value? What is it all about? You ready to kick it off?
Yeah, let's go.
Get that timer? Did I get it? Yes. Cool. I want to start this off, preface it a little bit more, and then I'll throw it back to you. So I think it's a very interesting question, right? The question really is, you have all these brands with this huge amount of reputation, and people know the brands like the back of their hands. They build up a lot of reference, recognition, front of mind. With all these brands, and then the brand all of a sudden goes through a rebrand. And I think for a lot of people, it's quite mysterious to why they even go through this process, and the expense of the process is often huge. I look at Qantas, where it was very small, slight tweaks and changes to the rebranding, and it cost $11 million to roll that out across the brand, because you've got to restart replating all these new planes. It's $100,000 a plane. It's not a cheap exercise to go through. There was, Woolworths did all the Woolworths brands years ago. Woolworths itself with the new little Apple-looking logo. Sorry, you probably shouldn't say that because they got a bit of flack for having an apple. Then they did Dick Smith, and they sold off Dick Smith. They redid the big W logo and made it a little bit slimmer. So there was like a bunch. The entire brand got a bit of a refresh. Yeah. From your opinion, before I throw my 2 cents in the ring as well, why do you feel like that does or doesn't add value to a brand in the rebrand process?
Well, it's a very tough question. I think we need 30 minutes for the show because it is such a
done. I'll extend it.
But basically, the bottom line is that, one, a rebranding is with the view to stay relevant. I think it's with the view to transform as to where it is. So you mentioned Qantas, and I think Qantas did a phenomenal job in investing in the rebrand because they had to stay relevant on trending, because iconography is the foremost fashion of what brands are becoming right now. But there are a lot of rebranding that takes place where we look at it strangely and we're not quite sure what they're trying to get across. And I think those are the businesses that are either, one, don't know what to do and just do a rebrand, or two, are trying to revive themselves because they have lost their way, or number three, they're a little bit bored with what they've got, and therefore a little bit of a refresher is something that can juice some energy.
So there was something that came to mind. Do you feel like some brands post-rationalize their reasoning to do a rebrand?
Very much so. Look, this is an
Yeah.
expensive exercise. It doesn't matter who it's for, but there are many reasons why people do it. It's sometimes the culture is just a bit staid and dull. Sometimes the platforms are demanding that you're not working the way you work, so therefore you need to make a change in order to be effective and relevant. MasterCard's another very good example that took a very complicated brand, simplified it just for digital purposes. So once again, I think it's a case of understanding where are you being received as to how are you looking is something that business owners don't always do. I think a lot of people just believe that they are great, but they very seldom do they call themselves, and very seldom do they look at themselves and say, you know what, we could be better. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of internal debate as to why a decision like this is made.
Because I remember with Pepsi, it was like highly disputed, right? It was a very mixed bag of reactions to the Pepsi rebrand. Even now, I feel like I look at it and I'm a bit like, do I love it? Do I not love it? I kind of felt like the old logo was more balanced, you know? It was just like a nice, consistent set of red and white and blue panels. But I feel like the way that they've applied it and rolled it out has actually been quite successful. Do I think overall it's like a very cohesive rebrand?
Yeah.
I still feel like there's something a bit disconnected, a bit disjointed. Sorry. They have kind of like a very slim, elegant font, and then it has the large, very solid circular logo pattern on top. I just feel like there's something not cohesive about it. But one other thing that people should take to note, and it kind of blends into our next topic as well, is that sometimes these brands use these rebrands as a way of offsetting profits.
Sure.
You made a lot of money this year, need to get some write off some tax on some expenses, get an agency in, get them to do a rebrand. Now, I guess the real point to this whole thing is it relevant?
I think it should be relevant when the market demands it. And I think that's where you're going to be in touch. It can't be relevant because you decide to do so. Okay. You can't decide just on a whim to do it. You've got to have some insight, some thinking. If the market is demanding it, then I think it's necessary. You mentioned Pepsi for a second, and I'll use this as my closing. I can't say that I really can recall Pepsi right now, but I know when I've done the Coke Pepsi test, Pepsi wins every single time.
Every time.
Yeah, Pepsi always seems to be the bridesmaid and never the bride when it comes into the marketplace. And I get so frustrated because they could be, but they just lack the momentum of continuous play with the view to be, and digital allows them to be a player. Once again, it's distribution, it's infrastructure, it's infiltration, it's penetration, it's memory. All those things play a key role. Right now, I can't remember what a Pepsi brand looks like.
And they have evolved it quite a few times, which might be the reason why it's hard to pin it in your mind, because you kind of remember some vague reminiscence of what they look like, but you can't really put together what the current one looks like because they changed quite a few times over a short period of time. But funnily enough, it is isolated to certain markets. Like on the Australian market, Pepsi's not the dominant, but in Japan, Pepsi's more dominant than Coke is.
Yeah.
So it is like, so that's also an interesting aspect to whether they're doing a rebrand because the market as a whole demands it, or because parts of their market where they're most, like maybe they were focusing on the Japanese market, and that's what the Japanese market was demanding because they're like, we don't really care. They're our buyers anyway,
Yeah, where the money is.
Yeah. So a lot of interesting aspects, I think, that people don't take into consideration necessarily when they go into that rebrand process. And in saying that, on the last note I made in that little segment, looking at marketing and branding as an expense to your business. So often this comes up in conversation, and I think everyone at some point has looked at it and goes, damn it, I need to do some more marketing, but who can afford it? Who can afford it? So you ready to unbundle this one?
Let's unbundle the next one. Absolutely.
Let's jump in. Go. I feel like you're ready to.
So is marketing an expense or an investment is always the debate with business owners, because at the end of the day, the argument is that they know that something's working. They just don't know which half of their budget
Mm.
is working for the return of investment of advertising and communication. And I'm going to be biased and say it has to be an investment. Because at the end of the day, when you sell this business, you are selling the reputation of what you've invested in order that the marketplace knows you, therefore there is value in your business. If it's an expense in the sense that you spend it for the sake of spending it because that's the only way you're going to get people through the door, well, then you're not really adding value or enhancement. You're just merely just trying to come get that product and then go away, and I'm going to have to re-advertise to tell you to come in again. And therefore, it's like insurance. You have to have it. It's you can't live with it and you can't live without it.
And I think, like, in saying that, it is also an expense to business. So parts of it can be written off. So talking to your tax advisor or your accountant can help you understand where the incentives are to get into this. There's also grants that come up from time to time. So if you're not in constant contact with whoever's taking care of the finances in your business, or you haven't given them the priority within the strategy to look at grants and options where the business can communicate into the public more often, that's something that you're missing out of that you could be taking advantage of, that in the end benefits doubly as a return into the business. A return on your tax and your expenses through the business, and a return on growth in the business. Now, we often find that people are more excited or more invested in bringing on a salesperson than they are bringing on a marketing person or marketing agency. Typically, people go out to an agency and hire in a salesperson. Now, with that salesperson, you're definitely never going to be able to claim back that money. You just got to hope to hell that he or she sells more than what that you're paying them, right? But there's something about the confidence in owning a human being, like they work for me, that's my human, that people feel more comfortable with than hiring an agency that feels external from them. You can treat and act with both of them.
Hiring an agency, that's the confidence. I think it's a case of the belief that the communication on the platform will do the job more than a person who physically is going to go out and get it.
Get it, yeah.
I do understand that all form of spending in advertising is expenditure, but it's where you spend is the investment component. So even though there may be tax benefits and grants and all these opportunities, at the end of the day, it's about where you spend. And here we go again, ladies and gentlemen. It's edutainment. You've got to educate, you've got to entertain in order to hold the viewer, the reader's attention. Because that's it. And that's the bottom line that I believe a lot of business owners don't believe in that communication, and therefore it's an expense, not an investment.
And then they do. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I do believe agencies don't always sit in the shoes of the client, and therefore they're thinking of this idea, but they don't sit in that office living the product. They sit outside and they say, hey, just do this funky idea, but they're not the ones actually the one that has to pick up the phone and wear the uniform. And therefore, I think that's where there's a disconnect.
Yeah, I think, look, there's a couple of things I'm gonna pull in there, right? As an agency, you've got to see yourself as part of the team. If you just see them as a client and you're there to make as much money as you can off that client, that relationship's not going to go well, and their experience is going to be really poor. So you're going to lose them faster than you're going to keep them. So if you're not giving yourself and making yourself part of that team, and they're not saying, hey, you're part of the team, come in, I want you to come in for this meeting, I want you to be a part of this because you're part of the team here, then look at the way that you're positioning yourself as an agency. And if you're a business that's hiring that agency, if your agency is not doing that for you, look at whether or not they're a right fit and if they're invested in your business.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and we just recommended this to a business just yesterday, if you're only going to half dip your toe in the water for your marketing campaign, you're better off just not doing it.
Yeah.
Because you'll throw 10, 20, 30K at this and you'll get no return. And then you'll say, you see, I told you marketing doesn't work. If your marketing team is thinking commercially and is aware of what the business needs are, then they will tell you whether or not you should or shouldn't be investing.
I think on your point, think of it like a Monopoly game. If you had to join Monopoly and you only rolled the dice 3 times to get around the board, what's the chances you'll get around the board in 3 throws? Very slim. And that's the same thing. If you don't invest the correct amount of opportunity to go around the board, you're not going to be able to go around and be able to build, because it's once you come around again and a second, momentum builds strategy, builds brands, builds value. But if you're just going to throw three handles of the dice, you're not really going to get around the board, and therefore that effort is wasted. That's how I review it.
Yeah, yeah. And you end up going bankrupt, right? You got to mortgage all your properties, and then
or you walk away from the game and you leave money on the table.
Yeah, or you tip the game over. You're like, I've had enough of this. Screw you guys. I hate Monopoly. That's it. Which is often what happens in the boardroom, right? Can't believe we just spent all this. Why is it? You know. So you should be. They should, like, your agency should be an advisor. And if they're not, you should be asking them to be, because they should be telling you whether or not that you're making the right investment. And always be wary to whether or not they're just choosing what is favorable for them, where they feel comfortable, or what is favorable for the business as an overall thought out strategy. So be careful with your agency, and just keep in mind what is their natural tendency. Where do they usually like to fall? Where do they usually like to invest their time? Because it might not necessarily be right for you.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Ready for the last subject?
Well, let's go. This one is going to bring it home.
I like this show. This is a nice, like, rapid fire show. So I love this subject. Grant put this one on the table, and I was like, we definitely should be talking about this. It's great because it's very topical. It's also a very big change for how we've experienced both brands and business up until now. And that's the whole work from home culture. You know, it's a new culture. It's growing, it's developing, it's constantly changing. People are adapting to it so quickly. IT companies are building infrastructure and expanding networks and all that kind of jazz. Let's shoot into the topic. What has the work from home experience changed for both customers and within the business team culture? Ready to rumble?
Let's go. So let me hit this one off. So we all got to learn, be it that we liked it or didn't like it, we had to learn to communicate via devices with the view to participate in business meetings, with the view to still stay relevant and be effective for the salary you earn, for the achievement or the deliverables, or what the company's hired to do, to that of actually keeping customers on board. And I think one of the things that was very important throughout this process is that we got a little bit spoiled, because we could come to a meeting dressed for business at the top and casual at the bottom. We could switch off and be right with our children. We could quickly run off and do the groceries, come back and still be in time for the meeting. And therefore you weren't just sitting, being logistically far away from your home, far away from your base, with the view to now do things that you don't get time for. So from a time management point of view, it made huge sense to connect. But think of the business now. The business now needs to be a brand. It needs to enhance. It needs to grow. It needs to deliver. It needs to educate. It needs to communicate. But now the team are separated. How you build that brand, and where is the brand still a brand, or is it that the brand is starting to like fractionalize, in the sense that it is not as tight and as strong as what it's made out to be? Some businesses can, like insurance. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But imagine if you were a supplier for a company and you work from home and the brand wasn't perceived the same way. How working from home has damaged a brand?
Look, I think as part of that, like to extend on that, team culture is a hard thing to maintain when everyone is disparate and everyone has different ideals and ideas of what the brand is and what it could be. And that puts a lot of onus on the leadership of the business to be able to create a unified and acknowledged and adopted ideal of what the business is. What is this business to the people who work for it? And then how does that translate into what that business then becomes for the customers that experience it? And it is like we've experienced it even in our own business, and we made a very cognizant note to at least have one day a week where we all come together and culminate at some place.
Yeah.
Because especially for the new people in the business, it was hard for them to like feel like part of the team, because they're like, who is the team, you know? And not just who is the team as in like I've talked to you through a video call and we've had a little coffee chat. Who is the team as in like, who are you as a person? How do you work? How do you sit in the chair versus, how do you talk about the business when you're walking around the office, these are experiences, like especially with training. Like training is a very complex one when you're separated for somebody. Somebody needs 15, let's say somebody needs 5 minutes of my time. The best they can do is book 15 minutes in my calendar. And when that time finally arrives, they can take care of that thing that they could have taken care of hours ago if they could only turn around and say, hey, I need to, can we have a look at, can we talk about, So there are definitely there's a lot of adapting that's required to make it an efficient and effective way. I think most businesses, to maintain the culture, that togetherness, need to have a rotation where teams come in and see each other, and different teams. Like some businesses are like, oh, the sales team comes in on Monday, the IT tech team comes in on Tuesday, the marketing team comes in on Wednesday. I'm like, but what if the marketing team needs to talk to the sales team? What do they do on Wednesday?
Yeah.
I would think you would do the marketing and sales team come in on Wednesday, and then next week it's the marketing and IT team come in on Wednesday, and then the next week is so they get the flavors, they get to understand how other people work. How many times do you hear in a business where everyone was in the same office and like, what is that bloody IT team doing down there? They haven't been able to fix my computer. Now imagine when they're miles away from each other and they never see each other, the kind of animosity that can be easily built within a team that never has to be expressed. Why? Because you only need to be happy from the moment you turn your camera on to the moment you turn the camera off.
Yeah, very much so. So let me bring this home. Okay. I think that business owners, managers need to spend more time on their brand now than ever before, in the sense of touch point interaction. They've got to evaluate the touch points in which customers are touched. Because
tell us why. Why because?
So basically, like I'm saying, is that I think it's not something that must just exist and just be there. I think it's something that's going to be a subject that you talk about on a weekly basis. I agree with you, bringing teams in and saying, okay, so let's talk about the experience. Let's work out where it was great for the customer. Where was it great for us? Where were we missing? How can we do it better? Who do you know who is doing it better? What can you learn from them in order to understand how it is? And therefore make it part of a weekly chat where you may spend an hour getting everyone to be brand focused, to be inward bound as to what we're trying to achieve, and make sure that everyone understands the value and the ethos of what the brand stands for, so that you can communicate it, be it on calls, Zoom, email, deliveries, complaints. Because the biggest mistake most business owners do, they never call themselves. Now imagine trying to call yourself when everyone is dispersed.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that's why I think we've got to spend more time and more focus making sure the team come together and talk about that brand delivery.
That's a great one. Like, not even calling your team once, calling them 2, 3, 4 times, and getting different people to pick up the phone every time and seeing what the different response is like. Because I can definitely attest to that, calling call centers now. And the people have never met each other, and everyone has a slightly different way of representing the brand.
Right.
And you start to feel like, why am I talking to this guy? It doesn't feel like they know exactly what and you call back a second later and somebody else, and then it's like, wow, this is the best experience I've ever had. And it's so clearly disparate from each other, so clearly disconnected, that it affects the way that you go, like, you know what, in general, it's just a poor experience. I'm like, I don't feel like I was part of the brand. I don't feel like I was part of the experience. It was just something that happened that I needed to just get done and move on,
Absolutely, 100%. So it is hard, but it is. I think working from home is going to be around for a while.
Yes.
And therefore, we've just got to adapt to the culture. Some business owners have enjoyed it because they've cut down on their rent, they've cut down on their agreements. That but then there are other issues. People are using electricity at home, using the Wi-Fi, so they've got other expenses. Yeah. So there is a bit of an imbalance at the moment. But I think ultimately the biggest loser is the brand. And I think that's where the focus needs to come together and build those bridges as to how do you ensure that your brand of your business from your team is growing continually, because one day it's going to be up for sale.
Ooh, nice. Was that a little like seeded drop for one of our potential guests? On that note, we'll leave you in that minute of mystery there. Grant, great show. Loved it. Super fire, like rapid fire. Love these shows that just go one subject to the next, and it's really topical and really fast paced and in depth. And I think that's what our people like. That's why we did it, the structure of the show like this. As always, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. We are looking for more subjects. We have some cool guests coming up. So if you'd like to be a guest, please join us. But if you also have a subject matter or a question, please let us know, especially for the guest shows. If you have a question for our guests, don't let it all be our questions, because obviously we can ask questions till the cows come home. Make sure it's something relevant to you. So please keep an eye out for the promotional posts that are going to be coming up across all our social media platforms, and write on a comment there, and we'll put it as part of the show and ask your questions instead of just ours. And obviously they're going to be way more challenging, because you guys are just bloody creative geniuses. That's
well, don't forget that we're on the first and the third Friday of every month. So we'll be on the first Friday of June and the third Friday of June. We're going to be at 4 p.m. We find 4 p.m. is a better slot. We have more people telling us things, communicating with us. So therefore, this will be one of our last morning slots that we're going to be playing it for a while, but we'll be moving to the 4 p.m. slot.
Good update. Thanks for that, Grant. Good that you remembered. Yeah, we have enjoyed the 4 p.m. slots, so looking forward to rolling those out. And everyone who's watching and has watched, thank you very much for joining us. Have an awesome Friday, and we'll see you at the next show.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
See you later.